Being a child of the 80s, I'm sure some of you remember this book. You're essentially locked out of your own S3 bucket. Where do hybrid projects come from? Moving to cloud is not the same as you did when you moved from tin to virtual. So hi there, I'm Tim Burton, I'm from 7FiveFive. We have customers like BBC Studios, ITV, A&E Networks. Hearing your own voice is bad enough, but hearing it as it's happening.
Where's the recommended pub round here?
Quick introduction, I'm Tim from 7FiveFive. We work with a lot of media companies. We tend to be what I call kind of, a bit more upstream of your kind of VOD and your OTT providers. We predominantly provide editing and media content supply chains cloud natively. So we have customers like BBC Studios, ITV, A&E Networks, where we provide workstations and asset management and all the storage completely in the cloud. So moving away from your traditional workstations, networks, SANs, that kind of thing, and deploying that end to end with it. So I'd come to a couple of these events, Paul had spoken to me about talking with it, and he kind of said that there's essentially two rules to it. No sales pitches and no swearing. So with that in mind, this is our platform. We do have the Lens platform. If you have a requirement around kind of wanting to manage virtualized workstations and that kind of stuff with it and automating that and doing it in a cloud native way, great for it. But that's not what I'm here to talk about tonight, because I don't want to sit here and drill another kind of sales pitch for it. So you used to have to impress people. Now you have to impress the algorithm. All hail the algorithm. So Paul and I kind of sat down and said, well, what's a good hook, basically? What can we talk about? And so I thought I'd talk about, based on our experience. So I've been working in the cloud since 2010. We've been running 7FiveFive for about 7 years. Prior to that, I did a cloud-based asset management startup. So what I've tried to do is kind of condense down into kind of, they're basically almost 5 pet peeves, but when we're working with customers or working with partners, what are some of the tells we look for that maybe this project is going to need some realignment to be successful in the cloud? I like the title of this group, Cloud Native Media. The native bit is important with it. Cloud is often maligned with it, and you can buy a cloud glass, cloud beer, whatever thing with this kind of stuff. But the key thing is, if you're going to make that move with it, and it's going to be successful, really, it does need to be native with it. So in some ways, I imagine a lot of these points is going to be teaching a lot of people here to kind of suck eggs with it. And hopefully, even if you take one thing away or disagree with me on something or that kind of stuff, that's great with it. But rather than drill you on kind of, edit workstation management, which might only affect a small percentage of you, I thought I'd throw it out a little bit broader and something that could be applied across the board. So this, I think, is my number one. I didn't decide to build up. I thought I'll start with my number one. This is the number one place where I see projects kind of go to die, and it's cloud economics models built on sand. And let's kind of dive into that a little bit and look at some of the things. So in my space, I was saying we do workstations. People come to me and they'll say, hey, Tim, so I've got 40 workstations, and I've got 40 users, and there's 40 hours in a week. So 40 times 40 is that many stuff. Oh, and they're 20 core HP, so I need nearly 7,000, massive instances in the cloud. So I'm going to predicate all of my maths based on that with it. And that would be a very pro on-prem kind of system. Obviously on-prem, you've got your sunk cost, the higher your utilization, the better your unit cost with it is. Obviously, whereas your cloud, your unit cost is fixed and your utilization changes the cost. So the two diametrically opposed kind of success criteria is almost with it. Or the other one might be, we can keep all our data in Glacier, only the proxies need to be in S3, or only this, that, and the other. An untested thesis, so they've got this concept, but it is essentially what they'd like to happen as opposed to what really happens with it. My guy knows what he's doing. He's put it in the AWS calculator and everything. So what can we do, or what do I think when we're looking at mitigating that? So you need to remove any anecdotal data when you're doing these kind of cloud models. We all know that very few people just get a wad of cash and let's just burn it into the cloud. We've got customers who are spending hundreds of thousands into millions in their cloud environments. A variance really does matter. So I would say that the anecdotal data is where your bias lives. If you're pro-cloud or anti-cloud or whatever you're pro, often it's the anecdotal data is where you kind of tip the deck. And when you've got a deck built on stacked assumptions, it starts to become worthless, if I'm honest. So you need to remove anecdotal data and put measured data in. The maths needs to be solid with it. Your assumed utilization is always overly rosy. So back to this kind of thing here. So we did this. This is what one of our customers said to us. When we actually measured how many workstation hours they were consuming, it was half that number. So they were actually getting around about, if you looked at a kind of, and how did I get that? Well, we were already managing their estate on-prem. I knew, and because the users sign in, sign out, this kind of stuff, we looked at the amount of workstations hours served, so we can map that across to the cloud. And this is that kind of concept. You like to think that you're getting a great deal on the infrastructure you've got. So you tend to kind of think you're utilizing it far more than you are. And it also fits into this, anecdotal versus measured data. Remove any anecdotal data from your model with it. Build upon a tested, I know you can all read, right? And you've already read the slides before, but to expand on that, you build on a tested economics model. If it's, obviously you've got to start somewhere with it, but you've also got to assume you're wrong. And then once you do actually get rolling, you then need to compare reality back to your model, look at the variance, update the model. The model's not a fire once thing, iterate on that. So if you don't have a tested model, borrow somebody else's and build on that. Take what they have learned with it and make work in that space with it. We did a really good piece of work with ITV where we modeled it. They then looked at it and said, well, it doesn't fit the model in these areas, actually around egress. And when we looked into it, we found some user behaviors that needed to change around how they were using the platform. And we were able to kind of continue to iterate and narrow that down. For us, the benefit is we can take that data and that model to other customers and say, well, actually, this is a tested model. Let's put your data into it and let's see how it works. But yeah, always assume you're wrong is a good way of working, especially with the misses. So my next one is hybrid. So where do hybrid projects come from? Or where do people come from in this space? And often I think it's because it's often from conservativeness with it. It's this kind of concept of, and when you kind of caricature it and say, oh well, I've always owned Fords and I'm thinking about getting a Kia, but I don't want all the Kia, so I'm thinking about just getting the Kia engine in the Ford. And it wouldn't be a particular, you'd be the first person who's kind of done that kind of mashup with it. And what ends up happening is that you end up to kind of deal with all of the edge cases and the niches. Or they'll say, look, I've got X asset on-prem. Everyone's on-prem and stuff. You never really get to buy it all at the same time. It's always kind of staggered. So there's always something that you only bought 6 months ago and something that's just about to be retired. So you're always on that conveyor belt with it. And often people then starting to make flawed cloud designs. It's always Vantage licenses in my place for some reason. Oh, I've got this Vantage license I want to use, rather than trade it in and move to a cloud port with it. This one is probably the at least in my space, in kind of media production and kind of broadcast, is often the most naive one. Okay, well, we've got 20 edit suites, or I've got 20 playout servers, or I've got 20 something. We're just going to burst from there. And then we go, great, where's the data? Oh, it's in an Isilon. Right, so you're going to store it twice? Well, now that would be expensive. So the compute and the data need to be together. Oh well. Or can we get some kind of super duper software XYZ file system pro thing to do it? You know, and then before you end up into these designs that get odder and odder and odder. You know, because again, conservativeness, all that kind of stuff. You'd be much better off saying, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to take one department, my short form department, or I'm going to take these play out channels or this chain and move that wholly and cloud natively to that piece with it, rather than trying to kind of replace one element in the entire chain with it. Because otherwise you end up basically designing these edge case designs that you'd never do from a clean sheet, you know, and everyone wants to kind of come up with solutions, and engineers are clever people and they want to help, you know, but often you can get so absorbed in your own kind of place with it, you end up designing something that you just wouldn't if you could start from the start with it. This next one, I wrote a blog on this one, and this is, without wanting to kind of poke any specific vendors in the eye, because there's a couple of them with this. But it comes down to what I decided to call Cloud API Fluency. So, being a child of the 80s, I'm sure some of you remember this book. And this is, I'm a fluent French speaker, right? You know. But this is pretty much the extent of my French with it. So in the same way that you can go to some vendors and say, oh, do you support, let's say, S3? Right, yeah, we support S3. I could say, yeah, I speak French. No trouble. Où est les piscines and all that stuff. What does it really mean, you know, and how do you mitigate this in the kind of reality with it? So API support it's a complete cornerstone of the cloud development with it. You know, it's well, everything's powered on with it. So just because a given vendor says they support an API doesn't mean they support all the verbs within that API. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that every implementation has to support every little tiny method that could ever be used, even the deprecated ones and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is that two people say, you know, yes, I support this, they will have a different level of fluency, and you need to understand not only, and this is not just systems and integrations, this is people. They need to understand that level of fluency with it. The next thing is what tends to happen, a bit like kind of broken language with it. Hacks and workarounds when it comes to API, they always cost more in the end with it. So I'll give you a good example. We were exposed to one system that had claimed full S3 support. Okay, customer had predicated their business model on being able to use Glacier. And Glacier Deep Archive specifically. So just to bring up on the same speed, obviously normal S3, you can go, I want to request a file, I get the file. With Glacier, you have to request that file is thawed out, restored, and depending on how cold that file is, depends on how quickly it's going to come back with it. The payoff, though, from that extra kind of ball ache, essentially, is cheaper storage with it, okay? Now, this particular vendor, what they'd done is they hadn't actually implemented the verbs for restore. What they had, right, but what they did have was the verbs to put tags on. So what they were doing was they were using lifecycle rules on tags. So they were kind of going tag desired state, hot, cold, all this kind of stuff. So they could then go, right, okay, yeah, put a tag on it. I'd like it to be accessible. And then at night, you know, the lifecycle will run and then it would thaw out. But that could mean that, you know, the workflow of the user, whatever the trigger is, could say, I want this asset at 10 in the morning. They then have to wait for the lifecycle rule. They don't have to guess how long the kind of restore might be. And because, you know, obviously they didn't support the restore API, they sure as hell aren't getting any pingbacks or anything like that. But, you know, they could say, no, we are. You can go into Glacier and this kind of stuff. You know, so cut a corner on supporting that particular set of verbs, and then the customer's left with this kind of Frankenstein implementation with it. Why do projects get in that place with it? And I think it's because you have to ask this. Yeah, I couldn't, like, if someone could come up with some shocking French, and I'd say, well, sounds like French to me, you know. Obviously I didn't pay attention in French. So what I'd say is you do need fluent speakers on your project team who can spot blaggers, really. You need to be fluent in what you're dealing with. If you're gonna basically do an RF whatever, don't do RF whatevers, but if you're gonna do one and sit down, you need people on your side of the table who are fluent in the technologies, the APIs, the languages, the technologies that you're gonna be working with to understand and really kind of verify what the level of fluency you're dealing with. Because you get that wrong, you'll get rolling, but you'll never get there in the full term. And this comes down to us saying I'm not a fan of the RFX, is the proof of the power of the proof of concept. It's a bit like, you know, say, oh, you want to learn a language, you've got to be immersed in it. Go and live in Spain for 6 months and this kind of stuff. That's what the proof of concept does. Immersing you in that technology, that integration, you know, you soon either drive fluency or you understand where you're not fluent or where there's challenges. And then you might re-rack your ambition. You might move to a different vendor, or you might do something or understand in a different space with it. So it's a long way of saying that some people have shit API integration. I've broken the other roof. But the long and short of it is that I like to think of it like kind of, you know, language. You can get by at different levels with it. So the next one is, this one's a little bit more abstract. So creating closed systems out of open platforms. This one's quite hard to kind of put into kind of, you know, context with it. So I would say open is a cloud pattern with it. You know, whether it's open source, open APIs, that kind of stuff. You know, you can go and read the API. You know, and for example, one of the things I think is a positive cloud pattern is that you could go and read the API or the documentation to a cloud service before you've even spoken to a salesperson or anything like that. There's none of this kind of put the documentation behind a paywall with it. So with that in mind also, my opinion is that no one system or vendor should own your data. You know, one of the key points with, so I had a great person was talking to one of our customers, was talking to Adam at BBC Studios, and they were like, oh, you know, Amazon storage is expensive, why do you do it, and all this kind of stuff, you know, oh, I could buy this, that, and the other, it doesn't fit. And he said, well, look, previously we had between 5 and 7 copies of a file at any one time, you know, be it with playout providers, with compliance providers, be it all these different this, that, and the others. And I don't care how cheap the individual storage solutions are, when there's 5 to 7 of them versus one central copy in, you know, S3 bucket or another service, you know, that everyone can then bring their different services to, that is much more cost effective across the board. But we still have a concept that some systems like to have the concept of owning the data, okay? So there are storage vendors out there that will say, yeah, we put the data in S3. And only once you get into it, you find that the data that's in S3 isn't actually readable. What they've done is they've taken the file, and they've taken that file and they've sliced it up into lots of little chunks, and they put it into S3. There's a technical reason why they want it, and it, you know, it helps them with POSIX integration and growing file support and stuff like that. But what it then means is that you're essentially locked out of your own S3 bucket. You know, you can't use all of the kind of functionality like, you know, on new object. You then drag back to the kind of old school of watch folders. So let's think about how we might have done automation previously. We had a SAN or a NAS or something like that. And you might have had an asset management system that looked at that folder, and you kind of trawled through it, and every 10 minutes went, what's new, what's new, what's new, you know, with it. And it was all very kind of, you know, having to update the state, you know, as to what's going on. Move to the cloud or move to an object-oriented kind of platform and storage system. You can say, look, actually, I'm not going to consciously trawl the file system because I can set up a mechanism that says on new object, call this method, put something on this message queue, on this SNS topic, that kind of stuff with it. Now, you go to someone who says, oh, but we can provide this, and this, and we need to kind of, use our special way of encoding the data. You get locked out all of that. So now you're like, well, do I store it twice? One in the special system, one in this with it? So, and the same can also be true when it comes to things like, the same storage system, a vendor that says, well, I know what tier it's in because that's the tier I left it in. But they're not thinking, well, actually, maybe there's some other automation. Maybe there's other systems that are interacting with that, okay? And again, these problems tend to come up further down the line. You get the initial system up and going, and they go, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could bring this platform in and not have another copy of the data? And they go, oh, no, you can't do that because they're doing this kind of stuff. So no, you own your data, or your client owns the data, or the rights holder owns the data with it. No one technical integration should dominate that access to it. I think, I covered this off with it. So multiple disaggregated services accessing common data. That, I think, is a cloud native pattern, if you will. And this is when I'm talking to customers about especially when we're trying to get projects off the ground and they're thinking about, going, oh, I'll use this because it gives them maybe a quick win in the short term. It's then the devil's own job to unpick something that's then live, especially when it's actually the data element to it down the road with it. So it's all about kind of avoiding the shortcuts, really, this one, I think. This is a pattern that's now coming out in the concept of, I talked about the concept of, rights holder owns the data. And they might go to a transcoding company, or they might go to someone who's doing like the forensic fingerprinting type stuff. They don't want to transfer the data. Well, we've already got it stored. I can give you a one-time access key. You can grab the object with it. So again, you can see that if there's one piece of technology that's like, no, in my bucket, that doesn't play with it. So yeah, lock-in also means lock-out. So, vendor lock-in, that walled garden, does give you some shortcuts with it. But then it does also lock out that vendor that you're just going to discover in a year's time who's going to actually, the next stage of the project with it. And you're like, oh, that tactical, place that we went, wish I hadn't done that previously. So, number 5 with it is a skills gap one. And this was actually the hardest slide to walk through. The other ones are my kind of just general opinions with it. This one is a key one, but I found it harder to to put down on paper with it. So and it's it's not just like, oh, they need to do a cloud practitioner course or something like that. It's across. It's not just tech skills that we're talking about here. So it's also around the business stakeholders and what we were talking just before now about, people, oh, I want to go to the cloud. Great. Why? What do you think you're going to achieve with it? What's the driver to do it? And I think, and the one I used to face a couple of years ago was, why can't someone just give me a cost for what this is going to cost in the cloud? And it's like, because you don't give us enough data to actually give you the price. It's a lot more nuanced. Back in the days, a long time ago when I worked in a more kind of tin space, you could take an educated guess, right? You could be like, all right, well, we'll put that Cisco switch in. We'll put, the smallest storage, I'll put 300 terabytes in. They'll probably need some of this, and this. And it would probably do with it. That isn't how you put the cloud stuff together. And you need more than the technical people to understand that. The product managers, the business stakeholders, even the CFO actually needs to understand that to get this thing, off the ground. I know this does kind of also circle back to point one, where projects go to die, which is that kind of, I've seen projects that have been spending money, they get the consultants in, and then the CFO kind of gets involved or the FD gets involved and goes, right, so what's happening with this? What business value are we getting for this kind of money? And then they look in it and they're like, whoa, there's a lot of variables here. You don't even know this is what it's going to cost with it. And where does that come from? Well, that comes from a skills gap. A lot of all of the previous points really come down to, well-meaning but naivety. DevOps, it's almost as much of a kind of malign term as kind of cloud itself is a term with it. But I think my key point is that moving to cloud is not the same as you did when you moved from tin to virtual. The skill sets do change with it, and people who have gone, oh, well, I've modeled it. Basically I went in my vCenter or I went into my data center and I've added it all up and I've been into the AWS calculator. It's just too expensive, Tim. It doesn't stack up. And then you're like, but that's because you're not approaching the right way. How we got into cloud was that databases are necessary but quite dry and boring, right? And it's my company and it's our bottom line with this kind of stuff. I don't want a database administrator. RDS was like, I mean, S3 and all that stuff and the transcode stuff. But actually for me, it was RDS that I was like, this is amazing. For like $100 and whatever dollars, I can run this entire environment, whereas we used to be like, ooh, databases. I need to get a man for that, And and I think really actually the DevOps thing is a kind of a key piece there with it. Now I have a kind of extension point to this, which is that when you're looking at the services like Fluency, and I was saying about how the team needs to be fluent with it, unfortunately, you're going to have to pay the market rate with it, And what I'd say is that for the market rate for the people, all too often we have this kind of concept where this is the person I need, but corporate pay banding says the job is classified to this point. If there's too much of a disparity to that, they're not the same products with it, and I honestly think that you could have 5 people who don't really know what they're doing or haven't really done it before, and one person who comes with experience and is like, yeah, this is this, we've added some people to the team recently and it's been really interesting bringing their experiences in, and they were like, yeah, let's not use Ansible for that. I've got the scars from that, And just that comment, we're not going to argue him down. He's the one with experience in this section. Well, that could have been 3 months of our life wasted with this. If you've got, if the team is made up of people, if the entire team is made up of people who this is their first cloud project, you're going to pay for them to learn, So, and I'm not saying that you have to have a team that's got all the kind of the stars and stripes from it, but if you've got a team that's not done a cloud project before and you're going to step over the POC thing and go bang straight into production, that's a bit of a double whammy there, especially if you're going to try and do the entire crystal ball stargazing. And before we build anything, let's just imagine everything that could go wrong and put mitigations in place. You know what? You're naive. You can't imagine what is going to stab you. You have to just get in the bushes and kind of get moving with it. That's again, it's gaining experience, whether it's buying it in, whether it's borrowing it, or whether it's going through the POC cycle and assuming you're wrong, is a key part, I think, of a cloud pattern. And that's when I see the really successful cloud deployments. You speak to the guys there. They've got all kinds of stories of, poor choices they've made, but they've iterated quickly and they've gone that. And that's the other beauty with the cloud, right? Is that you're not having to commit to, oh God, yeah, well, we spent 500 grand on that XYZ 10,000. We got to kind of make it work now. You can go and say, well, actually, yeah, let's build the entire thing on kind of like MongoDB or this kind of stuff, and then go, yeah, just SQL would have been fine, but you haven't invested heavily in that space with it. So to sum that up, it's cloud experience matters. whether you find it or whether you go and make your own experience, that's a kind of a key piece with it. That was my 5.
Thank you. That's great.
Cool.
Amazing. Do we have any questions? Yeah, Ashley?
So in terms of RDS, I gather you're referring to Amazon RDS, which is technically replication done for you?
RDS is basically managed databasing. So whereas previously we might have got Postgres or MySQL or something like that to underpin, say, an asset management system, or especially when you're building HA systems and you can't have the state in any one of the nodes, you need to put the state into something. Especially you can't rely on, say, VMware vMotion like you may have done on-prem to, I'm going to have one instance and I'm going to protect that instance. The cloud pattern is, right, instances do die, so you need to deliver stuff that's multi-availability, that's HA. So then that state goes in something, that's often a database, So having a service that's patched, maintained, and updated, and that's just one thing we can tick off and just say, yeah, we consume that as a service. That was a big wake up for us, and that was like, actually, yeah, there's a real benefit for us doing this here.
So 2 statements that you made in the middle of your presentation. One was about cloud fluency or fluency of understanding language. When the language is so new, how do you decide who has most fluency in the language? So, is the vendor bringing services to the client more fluent, or is the customer actually more fluent in there, and who decides? And the reason I said that is because towards the end of the presentation you said perhaps a guy says, I've had 3 months experience of trying to build this out in Ansible, and you definitely shouldn't go there. How do you know he's not less fluent than someone coming with more information?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's what we're talking about here is how do we apply a weighting to experience with it? Yeah, I mean, that particular concept was, we were kind of stood at a crossroads. We're stood at a kind of, right, which direction do we go for this? We've got a problem here. Which product or which service are we going to apply to this, first with it, And in that hierarchy, it was, we had someone who had no experience in that area who pitched it up. Well, I think this could do that. And the other person was like, I think we'd try one of the others, or let's not add that in. It's not going to be as good as we kind of think it is. There is, yeah, and that's always a kind of a risk with that kind of stuff. But that's where I'd say kind of immersion and the proof of concept is kind of key. Now, obviously, if they pitch up and say, well, this is a better solution, or this is the route I would take, and you start to kind of dig into it. I mean, I've taken that fluency thing and maybe pushed it, a little bit too far as an example. The core of what I meant for that was about verbs in APIs, and basically not just taking the first 5 popular ones, actually having a depth. And when someone says, yeah, we support the Akamai MediaFlex API. Yeah. This is it. Yeah, and it's also a problem with the RFI versus versus POC thing. If you did an RFI and someone says, "Do you have S3 compliance?" Yes, I do. Versus if you'd actually kind of used it and then gone, so I'm going to move that to Glacier, and then you're like, and then find out that they don't have the language to be able to tell it to do that, then that's where you'd have understood that with it, So how would you kind of, I suppose, sniff out someone who's masquerading? It's open documentation is the first thing,
When someone says, I wouldn't do it that way, can they back it up with, here's a better suggestion, because I've actually got some experience in something else? As opposed to just saying, I couldn't get that work, but maybe you're just a shit engineer.
Yeah. This is it, and that's why, back to the point, the experience matters with it, it's, you do sometimes say where they go, oh, well, we've got headcount for 2, insert price engineers, when really they should have one engineer at double the money, because the learning or the experience they get from that is kind of key. And it is an interesting point actually. Siemens Power Station Engineering, they rate their kind of let's say engineering equity not on the amount of people but on the aggregate years experience that they have. So it's that so when someone, they can take on 3 graduates and add 6 years experience to the pool, but if they lose, someone who, retires with 40 years experience, now obviously that's a long time frame, so it's not all going to be, bang up to date stuff, but I think it's a similar kind of thing around, approaching this. Unfortunately, the cloud is more complicated. It's a much more powerful tool, and like any powerful tool, you've got to treat it with respect. And that's why you need to kind of have craftsmen, working on it, I think.
So you talked about POCs, and I absolutely agree. POCs are the only way forward for anything. Do you find that suppliers are actually willing to participate in a way that allows you to do a POC effectively with a customer?
Licensing is still an issue, in the fact that often some vendors want to capitalize on the kind of the opportunity, so to speak, and push it through to a sale, So whereas some other vendors we work with are very pro the POC with it, we work with one asset management company who are pretty much mandate a POC, because they're like, look, tell us what you want to achieve. We'll achieve it in the POC. If you like it, you keep paying for it.
We're not selling it to you unless you say it does the job.
Yeah, that's it, right?
It seems like a sensible way.
Versus kind of like, here's the PDF, here's the suite, let's get your purchase order, and then you can start playing with it, kind of thing,
I'll go for my second while he's not looking. So you mentioned Open API. Was that Open API, or was that Open API as in the standard for specifying APIs? And how prevalent are people actually understanding that you should have a standardized document that generates documentation, so that you are not agonizing over a PDF file that's complete bollocks? Yeah,
so to kind of, to disambiguate the kind of comment with it, what I was talking about is open, APIs, so the concept's not specifically Open API. The idea is that, you should be able to clap eyes on the methods before you've even, sent in a kind of request for, for pricing or anything like that with it. And I think that you'd be able to select suitable partners and products if you can get into that level very quickly. Now, even if you're not fluent in that kind of stuff, but you have someone on the team is, you can say, look, I think we might want to use this technology or this vendor. Do you want to have a poke at it and just see what you think? And they come back and, I'd look at it. Yeah, it seems pretty good actually. It has support for this, and this, and I can see from the release notes. Yeah, exactly.
Then it's worth going for.
Whereas if you look at the inverse of how that would come together, you'd be like, in Zoom calls and getting the full pitch deck and all that kind of stuff before you're even getting to kind of see what it is it does. Because there's a lot of very basic products out there with some very advanced sales teams around them.
Yeah. They should do more in development than sales, and then they might get a better product.
Thank you very much.
So we got another wonderful evening here at Cloud Native Media number 8. Thank you so much for coming. Give yourselves a round of applause. Hooray! Thank you to Ashley for his amazing talk on all of that. Wow, wild stuff. And Tim for, again, giving us, great insights. We're back on September 6th, subject to tube strikes and life and all those things that might happen. But September 6th, and it'd be great to see you there. Thank you for coming, and see you soon. And what's...